All right. Yep, we are recording. All right. Well, I guess we're ready to start our fourth and final PLC. I've got the questions. I'll let you guys start to answer first after I read it, and then we'll all get in. The first thing that we're supposed to discuss is the challenge that we submitted for Module 4. Who wants to start that?
I can start. For my resources, I pretty much used websites. I did find a couple articles that I liked really well, and there was really a cool Kings Island in Ohio does like a physics day kind of, but the teacher gets to just chill. Nice. They have like a room for teachers, and the kids just go with them. I was like, man, that sounds so awesome. Not from Ohio.
Wait, Kings Island, the amusement park?
Yes, it has like a kids' day, and you bring your kids, drop them off, and you just go hang out.
Oh, wow.
I was like, that would be really cool. So I did find that. It was actually a really good resource for my kids because it was a workbook. They have like a workbook the kids do. So I found some really neat things that some amusement parks do with their kids that I thought were nice. So I did put that as my resources. When it came down to the standards, I wasn't 100% sure what I was supposed to use. So I did use the ISTE. I used 3 of those: Empowered Learner, Knowledge Constructor, and Computational Thinker. And I broke down when my kids were going to have their work assessed, I wanted to do it like a partial due date. So like a due date and then check something and then another due date and check that, because I felt like having a big project due at one time would be stressful. Mm-hmm. And I also didn't want to do a rubric. I felt like if I did a rubric, then they would be like stifled. Like I didn't want to tell them what they had to do, kind of.
I agree. I felt like I had a similar issue with the rubric part, and I struggle with that in my own class teaching history. Is I feel like, especially with my kids, they're good at school, so they know how to check and they get the box in, and sometimes it's just about fulfilling requirements, or they're so fixated on getting a good grade that they don't enjoy the process, even though I try to emphasize that. And that was some of the feedback Dr. G gave me, was the making sure that the standards are clear for them. And I think that sometimes I give them too much gray area just because I don't want to get them to give me the cookie cutter answers. But I could see, especially, and I think part of that's coming from a high school to a middle school, is that in middle school they need a little bit more structure from me, I think. But my resource list, I decided to look at what is the American dream with the Gilded Age and how my kids could compare it to present. And it's a project that I've done with my kids before. And so I was trying to get them to use the concepts we looked at, like voting rights, economic opportunity, higher education access, and use that to connect it to today, but specifically look at Wilmington. And then they could take the research that they found and see how the American dream impacts our community today, and then create an action-based plan with that, where they could do community outreach. So my list got a little too long. And so I had a lot of information that looked at the American dream as a whole today, different articles about that, but then also a lot of statistics for North Carolina and Wilmington, demographics and things. So I would definitely need to break it down, or at least, I guess, have categories or places that they could go, which would be a little bit easier if I knew exactly what they were going to be looking at. Are they specifically going to look at voting rights? Are they going to look at economic opportunity and look at that? But I enjoyed making the list, but I think that's the research nerd in me, just wanting to find all the good stuff. So,
well, as a history teacher and a big nerd myself, I want to take your class because I want to do that assignment.
It was fun. There were some good ones I've gotten in the past, some not so good ones too, but yeah, it's the name of the game.
I did, my question was basically about change and how that the civil rights movement and how that has affected us in the present, but will also affect us in the future. Yes. And so it was basically, the essential question of change and how that will benefit us. So I did a lot of performance-based tasks. I did like a choice board for my initial assignment with, the choice of 4. So for my assessments, I really liked in the understanding by design, it had this, I don't know if y'all can see, but like just the different types of a continuum of assessments, I guess, so that you can kind of do it throughout. So I included some formative and summative assessments, just checking in with the person who's doing it, with the observations and the dialogues that we have. And then using the performance tasks and being able to assess what they produce from each of those tasks. And then let's see, for the actual let's see, we had to do the standards, we had to do the resources. It was cool because it's been Black History Month and the Civil Rights Movement, and I was able to find, of course, a lot of good websites, but also a plethora of information through our social studies, like our New Hanover County Social Studies. Travis Matthews had sent out some things to us previously. So there was a lot of hands-on. Also through the Cape Fear Museum, I found a really cool, where they have this exhibit that you can actually check out for a week up to 4 weeks. It's posters. I think it's like 16 posters, and each poster is just different things from the civil rights movement and different people and different just images and different information written on it. So I found about 10 really good, just that I felt like were solid resources to use to research when she was doing these tasks that were, second grade. So I had to find things that weren't too far over her head, but she's at about a 5th grade level. So, and then the standards, I was a little confused about what to use too, but based on what we watched for the meeting that we had, I used the standards, and I do not know the name of the particular standards. It wasn't the ISTA, but I'm sure y'all watched it too, or I know Chip, you were there, but it was the standards that were like the depth and the breadth and the complexity and the clarity, and that website that she used where you could click on the big wheel. Was it Paul?
Yeah.
I think so.
Mr. Paul.
Yeah.
Paul.
Yeah, I use that for my standards. I don't know if he's the actual person behind the standards, but that, I feel like she was talking about that with that wheel and the different things that you could click on the top. So I tried to figure out, I think about 5 or 6 that I felt like she could show through what she was doing, and I could assess her on those.
That's good to know about the Cape Fear Museum. I like that.
Well,
yeah, I found some really cool resources and just things that I didn't know that you could, like exhibits that you can actually check out.
That's cool.
So I thought that was really neat.
and the History Museum in Raleigh does the same thing. I've ordered them once or twice, and it's the same thing. It's essentially like a library where you check it out for a week up to a month. But they will send you essentially like a lesson in a box, which is awesome. I got one from the Civil War, which I just wrote down on my list of resources because I had forgotten about it. That literally came with like a bag that a Confederate soldier would wear, some hardtack, just things that soldiers would have taken with them, a CD of Civil War music and stuff, which I did not copy to make one for myself. But that stuff is really cool, and I had no idea that any other museums were doing that, so I'm gonna have to check into that myself.
Yeah.
My challenge and I'll be honest, did all of you guys use Students You Have Now for this? I did not. My best student ever, who was the most ridiculously freakish AIG kid I've ever had, and he's now, as an adult, he's a friend of mine, and he's in grad school at Wake Forest. he knew, I have a history degree, and he knew more in 8th grade than I'll ever know about the Civil War or care to. So I used him as my idea, and hopefully that doesn't get me in trouble, but I wanted to do this legitimately for a kid that I had no question was AIG. And this is a kid who should have been, he shouldn't have been compacted. He should have just been moved forward.
Right.
And because that was his wheelhouse, his project is to read and research the South and how the South could have won the Civil War and what life in the South now would be like had they won the Civil War. And so I just found a lot of pretty much all online resources except for 2 books covering all that stuff. And for my assessment, I just pretty much decided that his continuing grades would be when I met with him, because I used that one thing that I think a lot of us use where we had regular meetings with them, that he would get his standard A's for the unit as long as he was applying with fidelity to what was outlined in the learning contract. And then I did like the idea of using a rubric because he is a bright kid, and from the reading where it talked about and I forget exactly what it said, the fact that if they create the rubric themselves, they're a lot more likely to take ownership of their learning. I thought that a rubric was a good idea, especially if I had him create it himself, and obviously go through it and tweak it with him and make it applicable where I agreed with it. I thought that was something that in the Weinbrenner reading, it mentioned something about how if they do that, not only does it let them know what kind of a grade that they should get, but also help them edit their content, which as teachers, I feel like we have to do a lot, go through and tell kids, no, you need more here, you need less there. And so I did use the rubric, but I understand it's not necessarily the best idea all the time.
I liked that too, and I've put that as part of my challenge, and I've done that before with my kids. It's easier with some groups than others, I've found. And I try to get them to think, I don't do it normally early on in the year. I try to do it later when we've kind of established a good base of these are the expectations that I've had for you so far. So what are some of the things we know we need to look at? So they're always like, okay, citations, always a category, evidence and how we use that, and then effort are ones that they usually look at a lot. And I like it too. I usually break it down into columns where it'll be, 100 to 93, 84 down. And so I break it down by grade. And that way, and I saw that on a couple articles I've read before in the past, it's not circling one thing. It allows for me to give them feedback in the boxes, which I like. And so it's more about, this is like what you did really well. And these are also areas of growth that you could work on. And then select it based on that. But I definitely think there's a lot more by it. And then I think it puts it back on them too, because they created it. So it gives them a little bit of accountability.
Creating it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the idea of me creating it and being like, here's your rubric.
Well, and I feel so stifled and like held back when I'm like, oh, but I can tell you learned something, but you like missed this one thing. Mm-hmm. And now I have to take away points based on this, or I guess theoretically don't have to, but I feel caged in sometimes.
Well, I think the hardest part about it is making them understand the process and doing it with them a couple of times, because I see it a lot of times with my kids. Even at the beginning of the year, I've gone with that idea of have the kids help create the rules for your classroom so that they take ownership. And whether it's making rules or creating a rubric or whatever, a lot of times kids try to find, like adults too, try to find the easiest way out. And their rubric is going to be like, I turned something in, I get an A. And getting them to live up to their potential and our expectations, I think, is the hard part. But I think if you go through it a couple of times, and especially, I like your idea, Anna, of actually having a place where you can put comments on it, because that way you can still kind of shape them, even though they created it. But it's kind of teamwork, instead of you telling them what to do or them just blindly saying, I want an A for doing this little bit of work.
Yeah. Here's my little project I spent a day on. That's what I love when they use Google Drive.
Oh.
I've told them they can't use Google Slides anymore, but it's so frustrating when I can see where the last edit was. And I said, you've known about this for a month.
Yeah.
And you worked on this yesterday.
Oh, I've got my kids working.
You know that I can see this.
Yep. I've got a project right now that my kids are presenting that they got the day we returned from Christmas. Mm-hmm. They've had 2 months or 8 weeks exactly till yesterday to have it done. I wanted the PowerPoint sent to me by 8 o'clock Sunday morning. And I was getting some at 10 or 11 o'clock last night. And I was seeing that it still said, Johnny is currently editing, or whatever it says at the top. And I'm like, really? I mean, you put in very little effort. Now, these weren't AIG kids, but they were, I think that's the case with a lot of kids.
I know, and that makes me think just now about how having those check-ins would be beneficial, even if I'm not doing quote unquote differentiation because of my kids being self-contained, but having more check-ins with them, I think might be beneficial just to hold them accountable and check their process. Because I think a lot of times as gifted kids, they think, oh, like I can independent, like I can do this on my own. And sometimes they fall through the cracks a little, or just need some, for some of them, it's the organization or time management where they fall short a little bit, not necessarily the content. But I did like a lot of the things in the Weinbrenner chapter where they talked about, I use a lot of journals in my class, and I think that's a great way to check in with the kids, for them to do the reflective part. And I liked I've done the roll the dice before, and that I feel like sometimes I get overwhelmed with,
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I just feel like I get overwhelmed sometimes because I want to grade everything and give them feedback, and knowing like you're one human, you can't always do that with everything, right? You've done that before too, though?
No, I do. I use the ticket out the door a lot, but I mean, I've got second graders and third graders, so I definitely don't grade everything that we do, but I use a lot of it as formative assessment. And one thing that really stood out to me, like I started several times, not from the Weinbrenner, but from the Understanding by Design. Being in third grade for so long, we had the EOG, and it's the first year of EOGs, and that is the assessment of all assessments, and you often have these kids who, like last year, for example, I had several kids do really bad on it that should have done much better, but I, for whatever reason, last year had 2 kids that during the last couple of weeks of school got taken from their families. Social services wise. And so there was this one quote that just said that assessment of understanding should be thought of in terms of a collection of evidence over time, instead of an event, like a single moment in time test at the end of instruction, because I don't think that it's fair. I think that a test sometimes does, tests and quizzes are necessary, and they are a great way of assessment, but I don't think they should be the be-all end-all of assessment. And having those little check-ins, like doing the quick checks and put up how many fingers, especially for my age kids, and even just the simple one that they said where you ask them to put up a finger, and you just say, you don't even have to look at what finger they put up. It's more the other kids that are looking around to see what everyone else is putting up. That's kind of the clue that you are like, okay, I need to check in with them later. That is a simple, an assessment that I think is incredibly effective and can drive your instruction and your grouping just as quick as the end of the day. Okay, tomorrow I need to put these with these guys. Because I think for me, I have a very fluid moving classroom because I have groups. I'm groups all day, which I think is probably more common in the younger grades.
As a middle school teacher, I really need to watch out what finger they stick up at me.
You get a few of those.
They're a little less mature than some of the kids that you probably teach in second or third grade.
Yeah, it's true.
Better.
We're about halfway through, so we'll go to the second one. And Brickhouse, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I'll let you go first because you had handy notes that you had ready, and I know you tend to let other people talk, so I'll not talk and let you do it. She wanted us to mention the real-time discussion from Thursday, or if we watched it on video, and I guess just give any thoughts we have on that. And since you have notes, it might be easiest for you to start.
Yeah, well, Lindsay did mention the wheel that we talked about with Richard Paul. But what I found most interesting was, I guess I've been taught blooms, and I never really even knew that there were anybody else to look at for questioning. So I kind of scribbled down Hess, Kaplan, and Richard Paul just to see what that looked like. Obviously, I know what Bloom's is. I probably have a poster somewhere in here. And then we talked about, or she talked about having a meaningful essential question, including a concept, and then a meaningful generalization, include a concept. So the concept was like inside of the essential question and the generalization, versus like the concept being the header, kind of. Like we need to make sure we have an essential question and a generalization that go with the concept. And then she had the concepts include change, pattern, systems, identity, clarity, logic, fairness. That's kind of what Lindsay was saying. She used change, right, in her.
Yeah. I actually took a screenshot of that. When she put that slide up, I took a screenshot of that. I almost wish we'd have had that. And maybe we did and I missed it. But when we were creating our essential questions, just for future use, I really liked that particular just list of those concepts.
Yeah, whenever we had the meetings, I always wish that she would just like send me the slide. Like I was there. I don't want to watch the meeting again, but I'd love to see the slide presentation, like have it, because I'm trying to like scribble down stuff. And there have been times when I've taken screenshots, but like that was definitely one I was scribbling them down, and I know I ran out of like time. Like she moved on and I wasn't done, because on the next page she went back to something and I put scribbled checklist versus rubric, and then I was writing down the depth and the relevance and the those terms.
That's why I take screenshots with my phone when I watch the video. I actually take screenshots of like those slides that I'm like, oh, I want to use this later, or I might want to use this when I'm writing to refer back to. So at least when you're not on the meeting, you can take those screenshots because nobody will see you doing it.
So they're gonna be like on the screen, like
You're right.
Well, and I agree. One of the big takeaways that I had, and I wrote down the same thing, Richard Paul, Hess, and Kaplan essentially forms of Bloom's. I also had no clue. And obviously it would make sense that people would have their own take on them or whatever, but I didn't realize that they were very similar sources that could be beneficial to us. But Lindsay, I wish I would have taken your idea that using the ISTE standards, since it was included in this packet, was the only thing that made sense to me. And now I wish I would have remembered this, because looking back at this with the standards that you used with the clarity and accuracy and breadth and depth and logic, I think I could have done a lot more with that had I thought in that direction than what I did with the ones that I used, because I feel like what you used is a lot more relevant to what she probably wanted than me just saying, oh yeah, my learners are global citizens. They proved it in their project through this, where I think your idea was much better than what I used.
Yeah, maybe next time we can ask her to like include that for her next group. Like include what's kind of more what you want here, because I used the ISTE also because that's what we had. And I didn't realize because that makes a lot more sense.
Well, and like we had said, if I hadn't had watched the Zoom meeting, I would have used which standards my North Carolina standard course of study would have met what she was learning, for like a higher grade level, but I still would have used those standards because that's what I automatically think of when I think of standards.
I do also. And I think where I slipped up is I didn't do what any of y'all did. I focused more on like what I wanted to see done, which I put what I wanted them to do, but not necessarily as much how I would assess them to do that, if that makes sense. Like I knew I wanted them to create this action-based plan and they would have parts with that. And I think I was focusing more on what I would be doing along the way with check-ins rather than looking at what at the end they needed to make sure that they had. So that's something that I would have to look at. And I liked how she mentioned in the video, I watched it after the fact, but she made reference to my situation specifically, because a lot of the things, and my coworkers and I have, and I know Charles, I've talked to you about this, we all have to take the AIG certification at our school. And most of us take it at UNCW, but I had a coworker that took it at UNC Charlotte. And we talked about how sometimes it gets difficult when you're doing the readings because it's not quite fitting into our situation with our kids all being AIG or gifted. So trying to make that work. But I liked how she talked about it being over time for my kids and looking at the same thing but breaking it down into pieces and then seeing how that grew with each of the kids. And that's really good for my situation because I have them 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So it would be really cool to look at those, how that I could connect ancient world and U.S. history because they all learn the same thing at the same time. Would be a cool situation. And looking at like she talked about with Kaplan, the unanswered questions, which I always really like with points of view, and how that relates to the past and then to the present and then to the future, like you were speaking about with the civil rights movement. And I try to hit on that a lot, especially last month it worked out perfectly with Black History Month and we were covering Reconstruction. And so I could talk about the 1898 massacre and we could talk about that impacts Wilmington today. And those things work well. And I also really liked the research article from Dr. H. I felt like, oh, like I know about Googling things. I don't need to look at this. But I do notice that I get so frustrated. I don't know if y'all see this with my kids when they search things and they search questions. It drives me batty. Why do you do that? Because you don't
realize you could put a subtraction sign. Like when I was reading, I was like, oh, you can put a subtraction sign or like
I never do that. I usually just list words.
I knew you could do quotation marks around like a thing and it would be like searching for that exact like topic, but I was like, holy crap, I can search this and put a minus sign.
And there was a lot in that actually that I learned about looking things up. I was like, I had no idea. I just type in what I'm looking for and hope for the best, you know, like
keep changing it up until I get what I need. That's how I felt too.
Yeah, until I get what I want.
When I was doing my paper, I actually opened it up and I was like, I had to like open. I was like, all right, let me research for my kids. Like, what do I want my kids to find? Let me try doing this, you know.
I did the same thing too. I really liked that one. And I feel like I need to do a better job. Charles, you were talking about like, setting expectations at the beginning of the year. I feel like I need to have like a big class just about this is how we Google things and this is how we search things. Because I think they know. And then when I watch them do it in class, I get frustrated. And my kids, for the most part, know like, oh, .edu and .org and .gov, those are good ones. But even looking at like how .org still is under business and commercial use also. And so being able to distinguish those and putting them together, I think, would be a really good place for them. Because mine still love to like visit like Mr. Tom in like Massachusetts. And I tell them, I'm sure Mr. Tom really knows what he's talking about. He's probably smarter than me, but we don't know him from Adam. Like, know nothing about.
And that's the thing. I've used searches a lot during grad school, and I feel like I'm pretty good at it. And this still taught me a lot. The whole plus and minus and all that I thought was very helpful. And I mean, it probably would be time saving to take a class or two at the beginning of the year just to teach this stuff, because in the presentation my kids do, their last slide of their PowerPoint, and they have to write a paper and do a variety of things, but I have them do their works cited on the final slide of their PowerPoint.
So painful.
I had several kids today that cited Google as a source.
Or they will still cite Wikipedia, and I get so frustrated. And you were talking about grad school. My undergrad, they didn't teach us Google. Or I see Google. They didn't teach us how to search on the internet. They taught us like, this is how you go into the stacks and do it.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I didn't learn I had to kind of figure it out on my own. So now that I'm going back to grad school next year for history, I'm like, I need to like bookmark this and be able to look at them. And I liked all the sources at the end too. I'd heard of live binders and like Padlet and stuff, but there were a lot on there that I'd never heard of before.
I didn't realize, you get like a song stuck in your head and you want to search the song and you can't think of part of the words. And then it was like, you can put an asterisk in place of a word that you don't know. And I'm like, really cool. The whole time I could just type.
I don't need Siri.
And it would show me the song. And so
I liked that one a lot.
All right, let's move on to 3 because we've only got about 10, 12 minutes left. Okay, professional insights you have gleaned during this course, during the course of this cycle. The one thing that I thought was really cool, and I can't even remember what reading it's in, so I can't really quote it, is the fact that having good products that are fun is a great idea, and we should be doing that, but it's got to be more than just fun. We've got to remember to have the particular level of rigor and thought going into it. Not just having them sit down and color a poster is great, but it has to go along with what we're doing and have a certain amount of quality to it in terms of the thought process. And that's the other thing that I've kind of taken away from this is actually from this whole program is that it's what they turn out is a lot less important than the thought process and the process in getting there more than anything, because too often it's too easy to collect something and say, ooh, look at how pretty this is. They did a great job, when it should be forgive the cliche, but it's not the destination, it's the journey. I mean, I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from both this cycle and to a bigger degree, this entire AIG program so far.
Yeah, I think for me, this is kind of the same thing, but it's the intentionality, or doing everything with intention. Because I think that we do things with intention, but I also think that we get so busy and we have so many things going on that sometimes we forget to be very intentional about the things that we do. And for me, with my gifted kids, I'm very intentional with my lower kids, but sometimes those gifted kids, that intention gets kind of brushed under the rug, because I'm like, okay, go read, go help somebody, go write, go do this, go do that. And so I think just overall, in general, just being more intentional about everything that I'm doing for them, planning for them, really being intentional for all my kids is kind of the big thing that I've gotten from it.
Yeah, I think that the learning, like mine would definitely be both of those. We have a math coach because I teach math. Y'all probably figured that out. So we have a math coach that comes like once a month, and she's been really talking to our district about, it's not about how many questions you give them. It's about, if you can give them one question and it assess everything that you need. But you just need to be very intent on that question. So it's the learning and the intent, which both of y'all just said. Like, I want you to be able to do this, and it does not take you 20 questions to get there. It's the process. Like, you have to understand it. And I think that this really has, there's one part in this Chapter 8, Assessing and Technology, that says, ultimately, these assessments should emphasize learning, not grading. And it makes me really, we talked about going to standardized grading, like where you grade by the standard versus grading, like you don't grade the assignment, you grade, how to do polynomials. It's really hard in math because we have 5 million standards. I don't know what y'all's standards look like, to be honest, but we have so many standards. It's really hard to literally put like A-SSE.1, but I could say like each topic, and it makes a lot of sense, especially when you're talking about these learners. Like, if you know this topic, then we can extend that. You can, you're already going to have A here. Let's help you learn. Like, it's about your learning, not that you know what I'm supposed to teach you. Like, I know, I'm sure some of your kids get there. I know, Lindsay, you were saying that your kid was second grade, but really like fifth grade. Like, they already know the material. I need them to be learning, not just stagnant.
Right. Yeah, not just taking up space or helping me be a teacher assistant sometimes, right. Which I am very guilty of sometimes, because she's so on it, and I'm like, oh, help me do this, or can you do this? And that's not learning. So, yeah, I'm with you on that. And I actually, that quote that you said, I included it, I think, in my paper, but I mean, that's another one that I starred that said that ultimately that, assessment should emphasize that they learned, not just, not just the product, but that they actually are learning, not grading. Yeah.
I like what all three of you said, and I think it ties together really well. And I wrote down a lot of the words you guys said: intention and authentic. And I teach adult high school at Cape Fear Community College, and that's basically how we do it. Like, we grade the kids as instructors, or the students, I should say. However, we, point system based at our discretion, how we break it down. And so it's not by categories, but at the end, they give us a sheet that has the essential standards from North Carolina. So mine's American History 1. and it breaks it down and you check whether or not they mastered it, and then you include work samples. And I wish that we could do that in the regular setting as well. And I feel like, honestly, a lot of the things I've been thinking about more so with my kids, as I was speaking about with my standards for Challenge 4, I think so big picture, which some of my kids that are more humanities driven can roll with, because they're more like that as well. But a lot of my math and science kids look at me like, no, lady, like, you got to tell me exactly what it is you need me to do. And need more of that structure. And so I have to check myself, because as a teacher, I have to remember they don't learn the same way that I do. But also, I feel as if I use a lot of my things for trying to make my adult high school classes better too, because I have so many students that really probably would have been gifted, whether they're 16 or they're in their late 20s, or I have students that are in their 50s and older, but somewhere they got failed by the system. And so trying to incorporate different activities in class that I feel like I've gotten from last semester and this semester to help them to feel that success, instead of feeling as if like I got to be here because I dropped out, essentially, and seeing it kind of as a not as good route, the second route. But I like that a lot. And I liked a lot of the things that the Wiggins and McTeague article read. And I really liked the Essential Standard chapter a lot. That was probably my favorite chapter in the last cycle.
Hold on to that. Because you're hitting the last question, so you can start it. The last question says, feel free to reference whatever reading you think are pertinent. You might even start with the one which was your favorite, but do reference them in your conversation. So you're hitting that, so go ahead.
I liked both of them. I liked what makes it an essential question. And then I also really liked, and I spoke about this in the last PLC I had, the thinking skills. I loved that. And I felt like it was a very in-depth chapter from Ream, but it was really good. I like that a lot, teaching them how to think, because I think, like you were talking about, Charles, the process and how to get there. And I really like how it tied into some of the creativity stuff we talked about with Dr. H, and how when they broke it down by grade level in the chapter, we teach creativity until like 4th and 5th grade. And then we don't teach as much abstract. And I think that's really important to be able to continue over time, and to be able to make it less, like you were talking about, Jen, grade focused, but more so the big idea, and how they can actually apply it. And I kept thinking that when it talked about in one of the articles, it was speaking about how making it more real life application. And I think and that might've been the McTeague article still. I think that's so important. And I, next to where it talked about replicating real life, I talked about, especially for my content area, making it more real life, because a lot of times we simulate voting and all these other things in social studies that are kind of cutesy, but like, why not let the kids be actually more actively engaged in what's going on in their community, and making it a little bit more relevant.
Well, I like the readings a lot, and like we all said, I love the Dr. H article just because it actually taught me stuff too. But the readings and what I found most important was boiled down to one sentence, and it's from Wiggins and McTeague, and it's that quote from Dewey from almost 100 years ago. It's actually over 100 years ago now, because it was 1916. But it's the second half where it says, does the question naturally suggest itself within some situation or personal experience, or is it an aloof thing? Is it the sort of trying that would arouse observation and engage experimentation outside of school, or is it made a problem for the pupil only because he cannot get the required mark or be promoted within the teacher's approval unless he deals with it? That to me is the summation of pretty much all we're doing, and obviously has been or should be since the turn of the 20th century, that it shouldn't be about getting a particular grade, but is this teaching them true life skills? Because I have kids all the time say, why do we have to learn history? Well, if you actually teach them things that are real world based and they understand why, then they're not asking that question because they actually understand the relevance. And that stuck out to me, and I starred it several times because that to me was the most important thing that I read out of all the readings this time.
Yeah, it says, can they transfer their ideas? Can they relate what they have learned to new contexts? Like, if you can't use what you learn in math or any topic in high school, middle school, you're not setting yourself up for, after school. Even like, I was talking to my principal today, like you have to transfer what you know from elementary and middle to high and so forth. Like if you can't transfer your ideas, then it's really difficult to operate well. I don't know what it was.
Overall, for me, like I really enjoyed all the readings too. I think the Weinbrenner has, in general, all those chapters, I've gotten the most out of them that I've turned around and been able to use the next day. You know what I mean? Like all the different, I like how it's broken down into the strategies and the, you know, the learning compacts and the like I've used just recently with my whole class, the one pager where you divide it into 4 and you put the main thing in the middle and you give them the topics and you get them, you know, to just put as many things as they know about that. And that's just a quick snapshot that lets you know what they know. So just in general, I like all the strategies that we've gotten from the Weinbrenner book.
I agree. Well, we're up against the wall, so we might get cut off at any second. So I'll let y'all go. I will. I could not get this to upload the last time, so literally I had to just upload it to my private YouTube channel and send out the link to that. I will do that right now and send out the link to all you guys so that you guys, if you want to access it in your papers, you can. And if we can do this on Friday or Saturday again while we take the final exam, it might help us all out.
Right.
But good luck on your finals. And if we don't talk to each other beforehand, I will see you guys in about a week and a half.
All right.
Good. Thank you guys. Have a good
Thanks.
day.
Thanks, ladies. Bye.
Bye.